that we do in the course of every day. As many of you probably know, there are more than 14,000 readings. Of that 14,000, approximately 9,000 deal with health. And it's no surprise then that the first reading to mention vibration was really a health reading in 1909, given to a small boy. And Casey eventually talked about the fact that vibrations really impact our health in two different ways. One, that every healing modality, whether it's surgery, massage, some kind of medicine that we take, osteopathic adjustments, exercise, whatever it might be, any kind of healing modality has an energetic vibration. And the reason healing works is that energetic vibration tries to put our system back in homeostasis. The other thing that he said about vibration and the body was that every physical organ has a vibration, an ultimate vibration. And when that vibration gets out of whack, out of what it's supposed to be, that's when we get sick. In terms of our personal vibrations, one of the most interesting readings was given to a woman who had a problem with depression. She was clinically depressed. When she felt well, she'd like to get all dolled up, makeup on, wear some pearls, go out and be with her friends. But when she was depressed, she just stayed home, didn't want to go anywhere. Very depressed. And so she got some readings from Mr. Casey on her depression, and she started to feel better. And eventually she got all dolled up and went out again, and she had a relapse, and she got depressed again. So she went through the treatments again, felt better, got all dressed up and went out, and got depressed again. So she got a follow-up reading, and Mr. Casey told her that every time she was putting the pearls on herself, she was reinfecting herself with depression because her pearls had become infused with a vibration of depression. Now, of course, if something has a vibration, you can change that vibration through a higher vibration. Things like smudging, prayer, energy work, playing uplifting music. But still our objects, our clothing, contain our vibration. And we know this is the case. If you remember from scriptures, a woman who had menstrual bleeding for over a decade, had been to physicians, never been healed, had a hard time, couldn't get help. And she theorized that if she could just touch the hem of Jesus' garment, that somehow that energy would heal her. And it did. But it's not just Jesus, it's each and every one of us, that somehow our vibration is infused in our clothing, our activities, the place where we live. Another individual had arterial sclerosis. Casey told him, kind of as an aside during the course of the reading, that because he had suffered so long with arterial sclerosis, if he was to ever move, the next person to move into that house would be prone to arterial sclerosis because somehow the energy of the walls had picked up on it. And yes, you can change the vibration, but it's just something to keep in mind when we go to the used clothing store or we buy a used house. So vibrations also operate like a magnet sometimes. In some cases, vibrations pull things together. Oh, here, I forgot to give you this reading. This is a reading that Casey gave about healing. For all healing comes from the one source. And whether the is the application of foods, exercise, medicine, or even the knife, it is to bring to the consciousness of the forces within the body that aid in reproducing themselves, the awareness of creative or God forces. About healing. So in terms of magnetic attraction, vibrations can attract something to one another, just like a magnet. They can also have a repulsion. One woman asked Edgar Casey why every time she went to Washington, D.C., she had a really hard time with her sinuses. And Casey said it was because of the repulsion effect, that her vibration was not in tune with the vibration of Washington, D.C. In terms of an affinity with vibrations, I have a story that happened to me that still to this day amazes me. For those of you who have heard me talk before on dreams, you've probably heard me talk about the fact that for a long time I had a real interest in the story of Noah's Ark. For whatever reason, I became fascinated with Noah and the flood. The fascination started because when I first got involved in a study group and started reading the Bible, I noticed by reading Genesis two things. That Methuselah was Noah's grandfather, and that Methuselah had died during the year of the flood. And as often as I'd gone to church, no one had ever pointed that out to me. And that little connection there got me interested. So I started exploring Noah's Ark. I discovered that there's an Ark tradition in every culture of this planet. The most popular one, of course, is Noah's Ark in the book of Genesis. The second most popular one is the Epic of Gilgamesh. But every culture has an Ark tradition. Eventually, I went on to write my master's thesis on the flood story. As many people might say, what a waste of time. But no, I wrote my master's thesis, and eventually I even wrote a novel on the story. Now, the reason I'm telling you all this is in spite of all the research I did over a period of 20 years, there was one thing that I could never discover, and that was Noah's mother's name. Nowhere is Noah's mother's name listed. It's not in the Bible. It's not in any of the rabbinical writings that have been done about Noah. It's not in the readings. It's nowhere. No one ever talked about Noah's mother. And it kind of bothered me. I thought, surely he had a mother. What was her name? And it was something I thought about over and over and over again. And one day I was in this building in an Atlantic University class up on the second floor. And for some reason, I was impelled, overcome, with the desire to go in the reserve room, which is up in the library. It's the first door when you walk in, the first locked door. It's where they keep a lot of books in there that are over 100 years old. And I had never been in there before, but I got the key and I opened the door, and I wasn't really sure what I was doing in there. But I looked around, and on the top shelf there was the biggest book I could see. And I reached up and pulled on it. It turned out being a Bible. But as I pulled it off, a little tiny book fell off the shelf next to it. Now, the interesting thing about this book was, in 1974 or 1975, when they moved the books from the building up on the hill to this building, they passed them off one at a time in kind of like a handoff. And then when they got to this building, they were cataloged and indexed and then put on a shelf. Somehow, this book was never indexed. So I could never have found it in the card catalog. It was not anything that existed in our library according to the card catalog. It eventually has been indexed. But here's the book that fell off the shelf. And the amazing thing, when I opened that book, this sentence stood out to me. His father, Lamech, Noah's father, had married a wife, Ashmuah. So somehow, by just thinking about over and over and over again, surely Noah had a mother, there was this vibrational affinity that pulled me to a room I had never been in, to reach up for a book that wasn't even in the catalog, and out dropped this name, Ashmuah. I thought that was amazing. Casey gave over 2,500 readings that talk about vibration. And essentially he says that essentially everything, all things are vibration. And that essentially all of creation is one force moving at different rates of vibration, which is very similar to the superstring theory of quantum physics, which basically says that all of nature is essentially different manifestations of the one force. So here's what Casey says about vibration in summary.